General Hospital teaser. After years of bitter conflict and layers of misunderstanding, Lulu and Brook Lynn finally found common ground, an elusive, haunting memory of a child once taken away. A fragile life buried beneath the dust of deception and fear. What once divided them now united them, a shared sense of something terribly wrong. Long concealed under the polished veneer that Lois had so carefully constructed over the years. It was not forgiveness that brought them together, but a deep, unshakable conviction that the child, whoever he was, wherever he might be, deserved the truth. He deserved to know the story of his life, untainted by secrecy, shame, or manipulation. Their alliance did not come easily. The years they spent at odds had left deep scars that neither of them could pretend didn't exist. Each had reasons to mistrust the other, resentments carried forward from unresolved slights, from emotional wounds reopened time and again by the chaotic web of family loyalty and betrayal. Yet, there was something different now. As Brook Lynn began to piece together inconsistencies about her teenage pregnancy, and as Lulu's investigative instincts were reawakened by a string of evasive comments and strange coincidences, both women sensed they had been caught in the same snare, manipulated not by accident, but by design, by the woman who claimed to have done everything out of love, Lois. It started with a glance, a word, a slip of the tongue, subtle tells that might have gone unnoticed by anyone not paying close attention. But Lulu was paying attention. She always had. And now, that attention had shifted from anger and rivalry to clarity and suspicion. Every time Joe's name came up, Lois reacted in ways that felt oddly rehearsed, too defensive, too polished. Her usual charm seemed brittle, as though it were hiding something far more fragile underneath. It was as if every question about Gio pulled on a thread Lois was desperately trying to keep from unraveling. Lulu, who had once made a career out of chasing down the truth, couldn't ignore the signs. She began retracing the timeline of Brook Lynn's mysterious disappearance during her late teens, back when she had allegedly gone off on tour with Lois. There had always been something off about that time, a brief gap in communication, a sudden absence that no one really questioned. But now, with everything coming into sharper focus, that absence became a glaring red flag. Brook Lynn, once so sure that the adoption had been a closed matter, began to see that she had never truly been in control of that decision. Instead, it had been Lois all along, orchestrating everything under the guise of maternal protection. Together, Lulu and Brook Lynn compiled details that had long been brushed aside. Medical visits kept off the record, hushed conversations with Gloria. The inexplicable closeness Lois had always shown toward Gio despite claiming he was just another boy in the family's extended orbit. They spoke to Ned, who offered them fragmented recollections, nothing solid, but enough to confirm that he, too, had been kept in the dark. Ned remembered the tour, the vague justifications. But not once had Lois mentioned anything about a pregnancy, let alone a grandchild. As they dug deeper, Lulu uncovered old records, documents buried beneath layers of outdated files and forgotten storage. Among them was a heavily redacted birth certificate, with a mother's name obscured and a father listed as unknown. The date matched the timeline of Brook Lynn's absence. The hospital matched the city Lois and Brook Lynn were supposedly visiting on tour. More damning still was a letter of release for adoption, signed not by Brook Lynn, but by a legal proxy with the authority of a guardian, Lois. The implications were staggering. Brook Lynn had not given up her child voluntarily. She had been manipulated, pressured, perhaps even deceived into believing that her only option was to let go. And worse still, the child had never truly been lost to her. He had been kept close all along, under Lois's watchful eye, raised to believe he was just another orphan with no ties to his bloodline. Gio was not a child adopted by strangers. He was a boy raised under a web of lies so delicately spun that not even his own mother had realized he had never truly left her. For Brook Lynn, the truth was like being hit by a tidal wave, one that dragged her back through every moment of pain and uncertainty she had felt during those lost years. Every time she had wondered what might have become of her child, every night she had cried in silence. Every time she had seen Gio and felt a strange pull she could never explain, it all now made a tragic kind of sense. The betrayal was deeper than she had ever imagined. And the anger she felt toward Lois was matched only by the guilt of having lived so long without questioning the story she had been fed. Lulu, for her part, felt both vindicated and devastated. Her suspicions had been right, but the truth was more disturbing than even she had dared to believe. She had once thought of Lois as merely overbearing, a meddler with outdated notions of propriety. But now she saw her as something far more dangerous, a woman so obsessed with control that she had stolen a child's identity, rewritten a family's history, and kept a mother from her son for nearly 2 decades. And yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected began to form between Lulu and Brook, a bond forged not out of forgiveness, but out of shared pain and a mutual need for justice. They were no longer adversaries. They were mothers. They were daughters. They were women who had been lied to and stripped of their agency by someone they had once trusted. And together, they were determined to make things right. The next steps would not be easy. Telling Gio the truth would shatter the only reality he had ever known. Confronting Dante with the revelation would mean reopening wounds that had barely healed. And facing Lois would require the kind of strength that neither Lulu nor Brook was sure they had. But they knew one thing for certain: they could no longer remain silent. In choosing to pursue the truth, they were choosing to rewrite the narrative that Lois had so carefully constructed. They were choosing to restore what had been stolen. And in that choice, raw, terrifying, but utterly necessary, they found a new kind of courage. The courage to face the past not as enemies, but as allies, united by the most powerful force of all: the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. While Brook remained trapped in the throes of guilt, tormented by the realization that she had allowed her mother to dominate so many crucial years of her life, Lulu had transformed into someone more resolute than ever before. No longer haunted by blind jealousy or past rivalries, she was driven now by a clear and uncompromising sense of justice. It wasn't just about Gio anymore. It was about reclaiming truth, about freeing herself from the entanglements of deception, and about doing what was right in a world that had long lost sight of the line between love and control. For the first time, Lulu could see the broader picture. And it pushed her into a role she never imagined she would embrace: an advocate not only for herself but for a boy who had grown up with a stolen past. When the two women finally confronted Lois, it was not with rage or hysteria, but with the quiet, determined intensity of people who had endured enough. They laid their evidence before her, not in accusation, but in demand for acknowledgement. Lois didn't deny their claims, yet neither did she offer full confession. Instead, she wrapped her words in justification, insisting that everything she had done had been out of love. Out of protection, out of fear that Gio would suffer a childhood of instability with 2 young parents ill-equipped for the burden of parenthood. She painted herself as the selfless guardian, the grandmother who had shouldered the impossible task of choosing the greater good. But no justification could obscure the harm that had been done. The more Lois defended herself, the more her facade cracked. Her reasons, however well-meaning they may have seemed to her, were saturated with control, manipulation, and an unwillingness to trust anyone else with the truth, not even her own daughter. And as the weight of that truth began to collapse in on itself, Brook broke beneath it. The woman who had spent so much of her adult life trying to find her own voice realized that the very foundation of her silence had been engineered by her mother. Every time she had questioned whether she was ready to be a mother, every moment she had wondered about the fate of the child she had let go, every time she had dismissed her instincts about Joe's strangely familiar presence, it all came rushing back with crushing clarity. The betrayal was not a single act. It was years of scripted conversations, of emotional blackmail disguised as love, of a narrative so deeply embedded in her psyche that she had never thought to question its origin. Lois hadn't given the child away to strangers. Instead, she had orchestrated a private adoption with a carefully selected family, one that would keep Gio within reach, within control, within the gravitational pull of her influence. By doing so, she had maintained the illusion of distance while simultaneously exercising complete proximity. She had stripped Brook Lynn of motherhood. Not out of cruelty, but out of a compulsive need to preserve an image of order and propriety. She had shielded her daughter's mistake from the world, only to wrap it in a prison of secrecy and guilt. The more Lulu and Brook Lynn uncovered, the darker the truth became. It was no longer a question of a single hidden adoption, it was a tangled web of lies, omissions, and deceit, all carefully maintained under the guise of love. In a dusty safe that had long gone untouched, Lulu discovered a file buried behind other inconsequential documents. Inside were the sealed records of an adoption, the dates, the medical facility. Even the infant's birth certificate partially redacted. The mother's name had been obscured in legal ink, but the rest was unmistakable. The fingerprints of the newborn, the delivery date, and the attending physician's signature all matched the timeline Brook Lynn had described, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. Gio, the quiet, thoughtful young man who had long felt displaced in his own story, was that child. The confirmation struck Brook Lynn with a force she couldn't have prepared for. It robbed her of breath, of orientation, of the small scraps of denial she had clung to for years. Every odd behavior from Lois, every moment of tension she couldn't explain. Every time she'd felt an unspoken barrier between them, it all pointed to this. Her mother had stolen the most sacred part of her identity under the false promise of protection. And what's more, Gio had grown up not knowing the truth about who he was, not because of any external tragedy, but because of an internal family betrayal rooted in fear, pride, and control. Brook Lynn's memories, once blurry and uncertain, now came into painful focus. She remembered the day Lois had taken her to that out-of-state retreat, a place meant to be a safe haven for overwhelmed teens. She remembered the way her mother had constantly shifted conversations away from the pregnancy, how she had told her, everything's going to be fine, again and again like a lullaby masking a lie. She remembered waking up after childbirth and being told it was all taken care of. She had been too dazed, too exhausted to question it. But now, every evasive tear Lois had shed, every time she insisted, it's for the best, appeared for what it truly was, a calculated dismantling of Brook Lynn's agency. As for Lulu, the deeper she descended into the truth, the more convinced she became that this wasn't just about a family secret, it was a systemic betrayal. Lois had manipulated everyone around her, silencing Ned with distraction, leveraging Gloria's loyalty, and preying on Brook Lynn's youth and confusion. What Lois had done wasn't simply wrong. It was devastating. It altered the trajectory of 3 lives, Brook Lynn's, Joe's, and Dante's, without giving any of them the choice to decide their futures for themselves. The implications of what they had found stretched beyond any single confrontation. It called into question everything Gio thought he knew about his past. And it left Brook Lynn to reckon with the fact that the child she thought had vanished into another world had been growing up right in front of her. It was a revelation that didn't just fracture their family, it detonated the very foundation of it. Yet through the heartbreak, Lulu remained the steady voice of reason. She had once thought her purpose was simply to expose the truth, but now she realized her role was larger than that. She was there to support Brook Lynn in reclaiming her voice, to give Gio the story of his life that he had been denied, and to hold Lois accountable, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Because in the wake of so much manipulation, someone had to be brave enough to stop the cycle. And so, with trembling hands and burning hearts, the 2 women prepared to rewrite the narrative that had been forced upon them. They weren't just survivors of a cruel lie. They were the authors of a new chapter, one that would finally give Gio the truth he had been denied. And finally allow Brook Lynn to step fully into her truth as a mother, not one erased by shame, but restored by strength. It didn't stop there. Lulu also uncovered a surveillance recording from an old hospital security camera, one that captured Lois secretly meeting with the doctor who had overseen Brook Lynn's labor and delivery. The audio revealed that Lois had not been a helpless bystander during her daughter's pregnancy. On the contrary, She had actively instructed the doctor not to list the father's name on the birth certificate and had gone as far as urging him not to allow Brook Lynn to see her newborn son after birth. These chilling revelations were more than just unethical, they were calculated. The evidence transformed Lois from a flawed mother into a master manipulator, someone who had sacrificed her daughter's happiness to preserve her own influence and image within the Cerullo family legacy. Brook Lynn had been robbed of the chance to be a mother. Dante had lived unaware that he had a son. And Gio had spent his entire life in a haze, never knowing the truth of his origins. When all the secrets finally came to light, Brook Lynn faced a heartbreaking decision: remain silent and allow Gio to continue living under a false identity. Or risk blowing everything apart to give him the right to know who his real parents were. In a rare moment of clarity and courage, she chose the harder path. With quiet yet unwavering support from Lulu, the two women began to formulate a plan, not only to tell Gio the truth about where he came from but to share the long, painful journey his biological mother had endured over the years. But the story did not end there. Tracy, upon learning the full truth, became an unexpected ally. Her reaction to Lois's actions was swift and severe, not only because of her deep affection for Gio, but because she saw a reflection of herself in Brook Lynn. A woman forced to choose between truth and family loyalty. Tracy pledged to stand by her granddaughter, to shield her from any retaliation Lois might attempt, and together they resolved to bring the truth to Dante. The revelation would forever alter the relationship between Dante and Brook Lynn, but perhaps, it would also open the door to something new. A chance to become the family they were always meant to be, free from the distortions of lies and manipulation. In a world where the past often fights to remain hidden in the name of protecting the present, Lulu and Brook Lynn made the bold choice to confront it head-on. No longer bitter enemies. They emerged as mothers, one who had been robbed of the chance to love her child, and one who had fought for what was right. Together, they walked a path riddled with pain, courage, and purpose. Seeking justice for a boy who had never been allowed to live as his true self. And when all the dust finally settled, it would be love, bravery, and redemption, not silence, that would decide whether what had once been lost could ever be restored, or whether the truth itself would consume them all over again.